We're going to look at the most difficult parable in the Gospels today. I'm sure you know it, but if you were wise, you put it in the too hard basket and didn't try to untangle it, which is what you've got to do, by the way. There's lots of things in the Bible that you read and you can't quite figure it out. Well, just assume that God's consistent with himself and just put it in the too hard basket. Because this parable, it seems that God's encouraging dishonesty and shrewdness. And it's been a problem for the church, for the church in the world for millennia, this one. It's the parable of the dishonest manager. Now, this is found in Luke 16, 1-8. Many of the versions of the Bible do not stop it at 8. They keep on going with 9 and 10, but 9 and 10 is completely different. It's a poem about materialism, about mammon, and it's not connected to this parable. In fact, this parable should be with the prodigal son. There were 4 parables in a row, because you'll see it as we read it says, then Jesus said. But then Jesus said, he's talking to his disciples after he's given the parable of the prodigal son to the Pharisees primarily, with everybody else listening. And then he goes aside, turns to his disciples, and he tells them this story. And it's a very puzzling story. In fact, I really think that we can't understand it without looking at the culture. That's why I'm bringing it to you today. I'm not a professor, but a person who lived in Egypt for 5 years. Okay, we're just going to read it first. You can read in your Bible, and you read along here if you can. If you're using a smartphone, you might want to turn your smartphone on the side if you can, because there's words on the side, both sides of me. Okay, let's go with this thing. There was then Jesus said to the disciples, see the connection? Then Jesus said, then after the prodigal son story, he said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager. I'm using the New Revised Standard Version because it's the most accurate culturally. They get something wrong also. There are other versions have their strengths as well, but it's more likely to be accurate culturally. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. And the manager said to himself, what will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. And then he's thinking for a while, and he says, I've decided what to do so that when I'm dismissed as a manager, people may welcome me into their homes. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and make it 50. Then he asked another, and how much do you owe? He replied, 100 containers of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and make it 80. And the surprising line, and his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. If that doesn't bother you, you're not reading carefully. It's a very unusual parable that Jesus is teaching, and we just got to unpack it today to see what Jesus was actually saying. It's the most difficult of all the synoptic parables. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And for it, we need to have culture. We need to have a cultural insight, and even with me, I know the cultural background, but it still is not me. I'm still an Australian at heart. But before we start, we've got to clarify 2 or 3 things, and that'll help us to understand the story. The first one was who was Jesus speaking to? He was speaking to his disciples, but it says that the others were listening too, that means the Pharisees were listening too, and always the crowd is listening. There's never any secret talking. This is done in a crowd. Everyone's pressed around. He may be talking to his disciples, but he never says, "You people move off," or "You people, could you step back a little bit?" Or says to his disciples, "I'm going to whisper these to you." Everything is public. Everything is transparent in a village culture. So that's who he was speaking to. He's speaking to his disciples, and the Pharisees were listening. He wasn't talking to them particularly, and all the crowd were listening as well. Now, the next question is the master an honourable man? The master commends his dishonest manager. So what about him? Is he dishonourable? Is he in on this scheme with his manager? In the story, it's quite clear that the manager is portrayed as a good man, a very good man, an honest manager. He's an honourable person. Now, what about the steward or the manager's position? We need to understand that this man is a paid manager. His job is to collect the rent from the land that has been leased out to fairly middle-class people. They're not poor people, and they have to pay in kind. The first man obviously has rented his land and has planted olive trees in his land. He's an olive farmer, and he has to pay, when he's done his harvest, 100 jugs of oil. This is once a year. This is not per month. Once a year. Jug was probably a very big jug, but he had to pay that much. There was an agreement between him and the owner. It could have been done face-to-face, was probably done face-to-face, because managers don't have somebody working. But the manager was keeping track of it and making sure that it came in. Now, usually the rental thing was you pay a certain amount, not percentage, a certain fixed amount. So this case, it was 100 jugs of oil. And whether he had a crop or didn't have a crop, at the end of the year when the harvest was over, he had to bring 100 jugs of oil. There are some cases where the landowner has made adjustment for bad harvest and so on, but usually not. And the second man obviously was doing wheat, and he had agreed to do 100 containers of wheat. So he owed it. From the time he writes the contract, he owes it, but he doesn't pay it till afterwards. And this is what we need to understand this story. And who are the master's debtors? They, as I said, fairly well-to-do farmers who are using the land of the landowner to do whatever business they're doing. What about the village community? This is not a deal between the master, who never shows his face, and a manager who talks to an individual. The whole community is involved in everything. And in this case, somebody dobbed in the manager. And so someone in the community told the master what the manager was doing, and everybody had a chance to know. Now, people don't gossip and put bad information out, but they are involved and they are watching, and we'll see that coming up later on. Now, how involved was the master? In Oriental masters, Middle Eastern landowners, they are very involved, personally involved. They attend to all the details. They don't just say, manager, you get whatever you can for me and I'll be happy to take it at the end of the year and live my life separately. They're involved in everything, what's happening in the field, what's happening with the weather, what's happening in everything. They're very involved because that's how they make their money. So that's the cultural setting for the parable. That'll help us to understand it a bit better. Now we can proceed to the story. And so we're getting back to the same text, but we're now going to slow down and look at the story because it's a short parable and all the details are there. Now, there was a rich man who had a manager and charges were brought against him. As I said, there are the people involved, not just the players in the story, who brought some charges that the man was squandering his property. It doesn't tell you how he was cheating, but the weight of evidence, and by the way, the information I'm giving to you today is coming from Oriental versions of the Bible, the Syrian versions, the Arabic versions of the Bible that have just become accessible to us in the last 20 years. And these were older manuscripts than the ones that were used to translate for our Bible. And they knew the culture very well. It didn't tell you how he was cheating, but the consensus of opinion among the Middle Eastern commentators of the Bible was that when he picked up the olive oil, all of it didn't get to the master. And he sometimes had excuses for why it didn't, but it probably was in that area. Now he summoned him and said to him, "What is that I hear about you?" What it says here is, "What is that I have been hearing about you for some time now?" Now we don't know whether the master just heard about it, but the feeling he's giving his manager is he's been on to him for quite a while now. He's been keeping track of him, and he wants the intention is to put the manager into such a state that he will self-confess and with his excuses about what's happened. He just leaves it hanging there and says, "What is this I hear about you?" He doesn't tell him what he's heard about him, doesn't accuse him of anything. He just hangs it over his head, waiting for him to confess and to feel bad about it. That's the Oriental way of dealing with this sort of thing. Give me an accounting of what happened was in the story, and this is surprising to the Middle East readers, is that the manager says nothing. The manager doesn't. He's clever. He's too clever. If he opens his mouth, he's admitted to something. So he didn't say anything. He just waits for the master to keep on going, and he says, "Give me an accounting for your management." This means bring the accounts of your management to me. Bring all the accounts to me. I'm going to check them over and see, and I have evidence of what you've been doing, because what you've been accused of. Give me an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. He fires him on the spot. This is what always happens in the Middle East. There's no, "I'll give you 1 month's notice, I'll give you 3 months' notice." He says to him, "Okay, I'm accusing you today, and you're gone today. You're finished. You have no more authority. You are not my manager from this moment on." Because, as the Oriental commentators say, what they know that what will happen is what happened in this parable is he finds a way to falsify his accounting. So he says, "Go get the accounts, bring them to me now. You're fired. You are no longer my manager. It's over." The Middle East people are most surprised that the manager doesn't give any excuses, doesn't blame someone else. This fact that he says nothing at all and just goes away with immediate firing is evidence of his guilt, but it's also incredibly strong personality to do that. Just walk away and say nothing when he's going to lose his job and lose his face and lose his chance to be in the community. It's just a big blow for him. But this manager is very shrewd, very clever. So he says to himself, what will I do now that my master's taking the position away from me? I've been fired. He is fired, not is taking it away. He has fired him. And I'm not strong enough to even consider doing manual labour, which is quite amazing, because people of that stature will never do manual labour. They'll get other people to do the manual labour for you. But he brings it up anyway to himself. He's talking to himself and says, I can't be a manual labourer. I'm just not strong enough. The only other option I can think about is to beg. And that, I don't think I can stand the shame of that, to be a beggar, to get money for doing nothing. And I can't think of what I can do. This is all I can do. And once I'm fired, nobody is going to give me any job. No one's going to give me any respect. I won't even be able to get a job because I've been fired for dishonesty. So what am I going to do? And as he thought about it, a plan is born. And this is the center of the parable, the plan. Now, if I'd been there, and I would have done this, and now I'm going to do it to you, because he says, I'm going to ask you, what do you think the plan is? He says, I have decided what to do. He said, I come up with a plan. This is a good idea. This is the way I'm going to do it. It could work. So that when I am dismissed as a manager, people may welcome me into their homes. I won't have lost all my face. I won't have lost all my dignity. I won't be despised by everybody. I've got a plan. So I want to ask you, what do you think his plan, what had you thought his plan was? And it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. This is a Sabbath School class where I ask a question. If you give the wrong answer, I tell you you're stupid, and then I tell you what the answer is. What do you think? What have you heard the plan was? It was a risky plan, very clever plan, and in this very short story, everybody in the Middle East gets it. They like the story because it doesn't tell them. They have to think it through for themselves, but they will discuss among themselves and come up with what the plan is, and his plan is very clever, very shrewd. Okay, so I'm going to leave it for, I want to see if anybody's bold enough to tell me what they think the plan is. Don't be amazed if you get it wrong, because this is the too hard basket parable. But it's good for me to hear what you think was the clever plan. So how do we do this? Just go on, unmute yourself and just talk, or how do we do it, Dennis or Lynn? Let's hear from somebody.
We can do this either way, Pastor. We've got a chat, and we can actually, if we don't feel like talking, we can actually write it down. But it probably is easier if you raise your hand and start talking rather than typing and chatting.
Yeah, then I have to look at the little thing on the side, and I'm not so hot at that. So just talk to me. What do you think his clever plan? In a moment, he thinks about it. He knows he can't get a job as a labourer. He doesn't want to do begging, and he says, I've got it. Something has triggered his mind, and he has figured out a perfect but risky way to...
I thought he was going to soften up all the other managers, or the other clients, and say, okay, instead of paying 100 jugs of oil, you can pay 50. And then he would go around and do that with quite a few of them, and then hopefully get a job from one of them later.
Right, yeah, that's how it comes across, particularly to us, doesn't it, Nigel? But the thing is, if he gets his books out and he changes the books, and the master finds that he's changed the books, and the master will see it. I mean, someone's gone in there and crossed it off and put another number on, then everybody will know he's super dishonest. and the farmers, they respect, and they are concerned that they'll have a continuing relationship with the master. It's more important than with him. This is the puzzle. This is the thing that I couldn't work out for years, for all of my years, until I got there. But thank you for bringing that one up. That's probably what everyone else was going to say as well. So let's keep going. Thank you, Nigel, for doing that. Got to pay attention, because it's a short parable. Every word counts. He goes out from the master, and he goes to his office, and he summons his master's debtors one by one. He has no right to summon them. He's no longer a manager. He's already been fired. He has no authority. He can't even talk to them in their homes, let alone summon them to his office. He's trying to do this before the news gets out that he's been fired. So he brings them in, and he says to the first, you see, when he gets them to change, he said, how much you've got? 100. He said, sit down quickly. He knows why quickly, because any minute everyone's going to know it's a village. Sit down quickly and make the change yourself. He doesn't do it. He's going to be protected. The man made it himself, because in the original contract, it's the farmer and the owner who have signed the contract. And on this contract, the owner has already signed, and also the debtor has already signed. And if somebody puts something else in a different handwriting, the manager, it'll be obvious that the deceit. But the thing is, the debtors don't know it's a deceit. This is the very cunning part of his trick. He doesn't know. He says, sit down quickly, do it yourself. And then he gets the next one to come and does the same thing with him. He says, take a pen and write this down. And he does that to a few. The story is not a novel. It's not a history. It's a parable. So 2 is enough to give our point across. Now, the thing doesn't work if the debtors think he is being deceitful. What do they think? They think, and he gives the impression that he has talked to the big boss and persuaded the big boss to go easy on them. And they're so pleased with, first of all, that he talked on their behalf. They don't know he's no longer the manager, and that their master has been so generous that he has reduced the rental. Now, it's not just a one-off thing. This is maybe a rental for 10 years, and the saving is enormous over 10 years. And they just think, isn't he a great manager that he's gone to bat for us? And isn't the master even a greater master that he's agreed to it? We've never heard of anyone who's done this. It's not even because it's a drought. It's not even because there's something going wrong. He's just, somehow the manager has persuaded him to be good to us. And so they go out of there, they're so happy, and they tell other people, and everyone's singing the praises of the manager, and of the owner and the manager, and everyone's happy. The whole village is probably throwing a party because of the wonderful generosity of the landlord, of the master. A shrewd and very risky plan. What's the master going to do? The master is an Oriental, Middle Eastern man. He considers his opinion. First of all, let's go back and think, how is he game to do this? How does he know that the master is not going to say, he cheated me and now he's cheated me twice, and whatever you've signed with him when he wasn't the manager doesn't count anymore. We'll go back to what it was. Just scrap that, tear it up. It's not, we haven't agreed to it. What seems to have happened is the manager, as he stopped to think about it, he thinks about how the master dealt with him because of his deceit, his dishonesty. He calls him, he just tells him that he knows. Some people have told him. He doesn't shout at him. By the laws of Jewish economy, which we have written evidence of, the master is well within his rights to take him to court, make him pay for everything that he's squandered, that he's cheated, and put him in jail. This master didn't do that. He dealt with him privately. He didn't shout at him. He didn't scold him. He just said, we're going to take this seriously. You've been cheating me. You can't be my manager anymore. Bring me the accounts, and I'll take it over, and I'll decide what to do from here. I already know what you've done. Just bring them here. And he thought that was his master. He knew his master already. Such a compassionate master that he's not going to grind him into the dirt because he did this double trick on him. He's depending on the compassion of the master when he does this double cheating. So the master has to reflect on his options. As we said, the whole village is now rejoicing, having a party, killing the fatted calf, and singing the praises of the landlord, who's like some landlord who's never been before. He could just say, it's not true, and their happiness would turn to sourness and probably wouldn't ever get over it. But he decides to let them think that he is good. It doesn't tell you what he did about the manager. He certainly doesn't employ him again, but the manager has found a clever way to make everyone think he's a great person. And somehow they would come up with some fiction about why he was no longer working for the manager. Maybe he has issues at home, or he'd retired by himself, or whatever. But anyway, that's not part of the story. But the master has decided to let it go. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. This is where we have a problem with the parable. Commended the dishonest manager because he'd acted shrewdly. I don't think any of us would have reacted that way. I don't think anyone in our culture would have done it that way. Would have taken him to court, or would have found a way to. It was a big loss for the manager over the next 10, 20 years. It had been changed. The contract had been changed. I deliberately left out the end of the parable, and that explains to us that Jesus was not encouraging dishonesty and shrewdness, because he said this. This is the part that I didn't have you read. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he'd acted shrewdly. For the children of this age, some translations say the children of darkness, are more shrewd in their dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. Jesus is saying clearly this man is a child of darkness. This man is a man who is not a good man. He's not a righteous man. He's an unrighteous man. But he is more shrewd, or more clever, he takes it more seriously than most of us who are God's children of light, do. So what is Jesus actually teaching through this parable? Such a small parable and so packed with emotion from a village setting in the Middle East. What is Jesus teaching through this parable? It's very powerful. He's teaching us about the nature of God. The master, of course, is God, and he's saying that God does take our sin seriously. He finds the man has been cheating. He knows the man has been cheating. He doesn't do anything about it immediately, but in the end, he does not just let it happen. He calls us to account for what we have done. We may think we're getting away for it for all of our life, but in the end, because he is righteous, because he is just, he cannot let our sin go by without having an accounting for it. It tells us also that there is an accounting and God will look at the accounting. It also tells us that God is not vengeful, that God does not delight in punishing, in making us pay for what we've done. But payment has to be made. And he says, you are dismissed. You are no longer manager. He doesn't go and tell other people. He doesn't announce it. He lets it go quietly. Jesus is teaching us that our sins will be revealed and condemned. God cannot let us get away with it. He's teaching us about the trap of sin. What this man should have done, would have done, if he'd been righteous, or if he'd suddenly been convicted and repented, he would have said, I was wrong, I did it, and asked for mercy, and he probably would have got it. But he did not. He said nothing. He wasn't going to admit it, and he also didn't give any excuses, because he thought he would find a way to help himself, and it was going to be better than throwing himself on the mercy of his master. And so he goes on to do even worse than what he's done already. He probably isn't filching 50%, or in the case of the farmer, the wheat person, he doesn't take 20% of the master's deserved rent, but now he does. So when we sin and we cover up our sin and we hide our sin and we lie about our sin, we end up doing more and more and more. We're trapped by it. We're brought down by it. That's one of the things that Jesus is saying and Jesus is making clear in this story. But he's also teaching us to use our minds. The fired manager thought through his options and twigged on the fact that his master was so compassionate that he wouldn't make it worse for him because he did this double cheat. He used his mind, he thought it through, he came up with a plan, very careful. Let's summon them in, get them down, sit them down quickly, who's going to write and who's not going to write, all of it. He did all the detail because he used his mind. And there's a commendation here for people who use their mind. That's what the shrewdness is about. He's also teaching us to be people of action. As soon as he had his plan, he went into action and did it. As soon as we make our decision about what to do about our sin, to ask for forgiveness, to ask God to give us another chance, and go ahead and do it. Think it through, do it. Jesus does not teach his disciples to lie and cheat. He teaches them to be shrewd enough to take God seriously. Take God seriously means take his justice seriously. God cannot let us get away with sin, cannot let us get away with hurting other people, cannot let us get away with any of the bad things that I'll let you to think about for yourself. And the second thing is take God seriously, that he has compassion. He's waiting to forgive us. He's waiting to help us get back on our feet again. He's waiting to turn our sin, our red sin, into white wool. And if we take God seriously in both of these areas, That's what Jesus was trying to get his disciples to do and to think. So the story, the most difficult story in the Synoptic Gospels, is not so difficult when you untangle it correctly. He commends the shrewdness. He doesn't commend the unrighteousness. And he wants us to take him seriously and not just come up with a plan to confess our sins and ask for forgiveness, but do it. Be people of action. Get it done. Get it out of the way. Don't hide it for years. Don't think you're going to get away with it. And get back on the path and be a person whose life has been restored by a loving God, and we can put everything behind us and go ahead with what's left, even if it's damaged. What's left, God with us, and our life will be a walk with him from then on. Are you? Is a question we need to ask ourselves in the face of this parable. Am I a child of light, a person who knows and loves God, going to be shrewd enough to take God seriously? That is the lesson Jesus was teaching his disciples, and therefore teaches us, his disciples, in this age. May God bless you as you think about Jesus' teaching. And now, to him who is able to keep us from falling and present us faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy, to the only wise God our Father be glory and majesty, dominion and power, both now and forever. Amen.